How's it going, PD team? I've got an amazing tutorial for you today. We're going to dive deep into the world of technical product visualization, where we rig a coil for a high-end shock absorber. To get this model to work and look physically accurate, there are several things to consider, be aware of, and solve for, as a job like this would require your model to represent its function nearly perfect. That's why it's important for you to fully educate yourself on how a product works and functions in extensive detail. Ask the client lots of questions. I cannot emphasize this enough. This tutorial assumes you have a basic understanding of Cinema 4D's based Xpresso programming language. You should be fine if you're just a beginner. I'll explain things in detail. I suggest you watch this tutorial from beginning to end, then rewatch it by following along to get maximum learning absorption. While this tutorial is centered around rigging a shock absorber, the technique can be applied to many other mechanical objects. With that being said, let's dive in. Okay, so here we are with the model that was done in CAD. And so when you get a client that is doing any kind of engineering work, they're going to provide you with the necessary model, and you would then convert it and then remodel or remesh anything that needs to animate. In this case, we have a spring or a coil that will need to be animated, and this is perfect. So what we can do is we can just copy this coil and bring it into another tab to get the spring coil to be correct, and then we'll bring it back into this project. So what we're going to make today is this coil, and I've already got it rigged up. So you can see we have a slider for compression, and when we look at our example here, this coil will compress from the base and move upward, because over here is the pre-spring. So that's our unsprung weight transfers into this coil. So this is what's connected to the chassis. So our wheel or our bike shock, whatever, this is for a bike, would mount into here, and then this is into the frame. So this would connect with the rear part of the swing arm. The model that we're going to be animating is just this coil for this demo. And you can see we have a series of controls. We have the compression, and then we have the maximum compression amount. So this is useful for client has changes and says that they don't want it to compress as much. We can adjust that here. So I can set it to maximum compression, and you can see I can change this. I'll set it back to 65. So it's ultra compressed here. And you'll notice what happens is that this is biased. So there's biasing at the top and the bottom. So the coil is tighter at the bottom and at the top. The distances are different. You can see it better here. So here it's tighter, and I'll show you how to model that and actually animate it correctly. But you'll notice when it springs upwards, it evens out. And that is the trickiest part of this, and I'm going to show you how to do it. Next, what we have is we have this ability to trim it. And the reason I make this available is so you don't have to go into the model and deactivate the trimming. What this allows it to do is when it's animated, it will allow it to play back faster. So before you render, you just turn it back on. So I'm going to disable it, and I'm going to click on animated, and then I can hit play, and you can see it's animating the compression. So the first slider is how much compression it has. So if we're animating this and it starts out with the scene where it enters the scene and we don't want it animated, and then we can animate the amount up so we can show the compression start. Then movement detail is how much noise is included in the animation. This is like layers. So the first layer is just a simple movement, and then each incremental number will add a level of detail. And so if you watch like GoPro footage of a shock or a truck, you will see when they're going over dunes and whatnot, you have these micro movements. So you'll have big movements like this, and then you'll have an extra layer of noise and shake within it. So you'll see like as it moves up, it gives a little bit of a vibration. And so that feels a little more accurate. Then we have speed, which does the opposite. So you can slow it down or speed it up. And then we have the seed, so we can change the randomness. So this is the rig that we're going to be making. I built this out in a separate project. And the reason I do that is because it strips out all the other noise within the project, and it allows us to kind of itemize our problems that we're solving. The way this is rigged up is you don't have to worry about things being dependent in world space. So you can see here, I can move this up or down to make adjustments. So it'll still work. It doesn't matter where it's placed. Okay. So if you rig this up properly, these elements can be brought in as separate pieces to kind of navigate. So I'll go back to the shock controller, bring the compression down. And so this requires a little bit of Xpresso programming. So let's go ahead and bring in. So I'm going to copy my spring that was exported out and brought into Cinema and use it as a template. So you can follow along easier, I've included this coil as a resource in the link in the description below. So go ahead and download that. So here's my template that I'm going to work with. I brought it in, and it's just the Polygon. And you can see we have a biasing here where the top and the bottom are tighter and the middle has the larger gap. You'll also notice the top and the bottom are trimmed to rest in the housing. So we'll address all those issues. So first, let's build out the spring. And so this will need to be a dynamic object. Just simply squishing the spring will not work. So if I hit T to transform and squish it, we're going to get a warping of the geometry. So we cannot do this. So we'll have to do a sweep on this spring. So So to do that, we're gonna go in and add a helix, set it to vertical, and then I'm gonna go to the side, and you'll notice the spring I placed right at 0, so it rests directly on the bottom. The other thing that we'll notice is if I go to the coordinates, you'll see the height is 120, and that number is really important because that's gonna dictate how we build this out. So I'm evening it out, it's pretty much 120 on the height. So I'll set the height of this to 60, which is half, and I'll explain why in a second. And then we need to get the width, so I'll set this in, and I know the value is 20.5 and 20.5. Now, our coil is gonna spin, but if we look at it here, we need to go in the opposite direction, like this. And you can see when we get to around 1100, it gets pretty close. So I'll come in here and I'll try to get the biasing correct. And the rotation value is gonna be either whole numbers or 50% of that. So I'm gonna try 360 times 4, and you can see it's close, but it's got an extra twist to it. So I'm gonna do 360 times 3, and it's closer, so it's in between. So I'm gonna try 360 times 3.5, and we need to go in the negative value, and you can see we're close. So I'll set this to 38, 35, let's do 38. And you can see we just need to rotate this a little bit, and there we go. So this process will take you a little bit. It took me about 10 minutes to get the exact values, but there's our spring. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna copy and paste it. So we're gonna Command-C, Command-V, and we're gonna go into our front view and put the value of it to 120, which is the height. And then we'll rotate it 180 degrees, and there we go. So you can see there's our spring. It's got the correct biasing, the top and the bottom. And your values, if you need to change the biasing, you wanna select both. So your values are the same, and we can adjust the biasing to get it correct. I found 38 is perfect. So there you go. The coil is exactly in the middle. So next what we'll do is we'll turn off our spring here, and we'll throw it in a connect object, take both of our objects, throw it in, and we're gonna turn off the weld. And then I'm gonna say current state of object, and I'm gonna take my connect and throw it in my archive so I have the original in case I need to fall back on it. And that's just a null where I've turned off the visibility. So here's our object. Now we'll go to the half point right here. And actually before I do this, you can see we have too many points. So this is a perfect example why you want to keep the original. So I'm gonna set these two, instead of 100, I'm gonna set it to 40. That should be more than enough. And then I'll go to current state of object, drag it up, and then we select our points. You can see we don't have as many, and that's perfect. So I'll go to this point here where it's got a gap. We need to merge these. So I'll just go to the pen tool, connect the points. So now you can see we get a consistent connection. And then I'll go to my brush selection, delete one of these points so we don't get a kink. And what you should get is it should be blue on one end and white on the other, means that it's connected, a connected object. So there's our coil, and you're gonna wanna make sure your anchor points are right at the bottom or the base at 0. That's really important for this to work. So next we'll set up our structure. So I'm gonna add a group here. I'm gonna call this shock. I'll add another null and call this slide. Add the null inside, add our connect object, which is the spline, and we'll rename it to coil. And so by throwing the coil inside a slider null, inside a shock, we can move this up and the coil value will still be 0. So that's really important for you to do. So next what we're gonna do is inside of the shock, we're gonna hold shift, click the null, and call this Xpresso. We're gonna right click on it, go to programming tags, Xpresso, and I've already docked my Xpresso into this viewport. What we need to do is we're gonna move the slider up and down and squish the coil. So to get this coil to squish and slide in our Xpresso, we're gonna bring in our slider, and we're gonna bring in the coordinates, and we're gonna bring the Y in. So I'm just gonna drag it onto the blue input field, and we're gonna bring in our shock, and we need a compression value. So we'll go to the object tab, click user data, make sure your shock null is selected, go to manage user data. We're gonna add a group, call this shock control. And then with the shock control selected, we're gonna click add, and we're gonna call this compression, hit enter, and we're gonna change the type from float to float slider. And so here's our slider. We'll leave the defaults, hit okay. And now you can see we have a slider for the compression. So we'll drag the value of compression into our output of our shock null. And then what we need to do is we need to slide this value and move the object upwards. So I'm gonna right click, go to Xpresso, calculate, range mapper. And range mapper is gonna allow us to do this. So what we do is in our range mapper, our input is a percentage value. So we're gonna go to user data and do %. Drag this in, and our output is going to be a value that we plug in here. So what we need to do is we need to figure out how high this is gonna move. So if I go to the slider and drag this up, let's just start with 50 centimeters. So we'll keep it even, and we can adjust this value later. So this value will set to 50. So when it's at 100, it's moved 50 units up. Now I like taking my value and setting a constant and say, call this amount. And in this value, instead of plugging it in here, I like having it as a node. So I'll come in here and say output upper and plug this in. And then we plug this in. So I'll set this to 50. And then you can see our shock moves upwards. So next what we need to do is we need to squish this coil the exact distance that this travels. So that 50 value is important. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a deformer, but we're actually going to use a fall off field. So I'm going to add a plane effector, and it's at the base here, which is important. So we'll come in here and we'll add it in here, and we can use these effectors as deformers. And to do that, we're going to click the deformer tab and go to point and things are going to go haywire, which is normal. What we're going to do is we're going to change it to effector, and I'll go to the profile and you can see it moves this upwards. So I'm going to set this to 50, neg 50, and you can see it works the opposite. So keep that in mind. So with this, it's moving all these points evenly. We want that bias, and to squish this is we're going to add a field, and we'll use a linear field, and the direction is not correct. So what we'll do is we'll change the linear field to positive Y, and we'll set this to half our height, which is 60, and we'll move it up, and your values need to be exact. So we'll do even numbers. So I'll put it at 60 because our object is half the height. So you can see it's exactly pixel perfect. And then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be controlling this strength amount. So let's go ahead and plug that in. So we'll go to our Xpresso, add our plane effector, drag in our strength, bring the compression, because this is 100% and 0%, connect it directly. And now if we go to our plane effector and set this to neg 50 and try our slider, you can see it's squishing and it's exact. That coil top is perfect. Whoa, hold on a second. So you made it this far. Clearly, you're enjoying the content. Would you consider clicking the thanks button on this video to help grow the channel's community so I can make more great content just for you? Any amount is greatly appreciated. If money is tight right now, then do me a favor and just smash that like button immediately. Now to the video. So what we want to do is we also want to take in our Xpresso and have this value be plugged in to the maximum distance value, which is this value right here. So to do that, we're going to go to our plane effector and we're going to drag in the Y value, and we want to invert the value because this is a positive number. We need this to be a negative number. So the same distance, but just a negative value. So an easy way to do that is go to Xpresso, calculate math, and we'll do instead of add, we'll do multiply. We'll take this value, drag it in, and we'll multiply it by -1 and then plug it in. So then we can change this distance to like 60 and it will compress even more while still updating that value. So you can see it's perfect still. So the next thing I want to do is I want to check my coil. So I want to get some thickness on this. So I'm going to add a end side and I'll set it to 3, turn on my spring here so I can see the thickness, drag it into the slider. We'll add a sweep object, drag it in, drag both of our objects in. And I just so happen to pick the correct value. So in my case, it's set to 3, and we'll turn this off. And now we can do a slider for the side amount. I'll set it to 16 and there we go. So we can try out our shock, and you'll notice we get some twisting happening. See the twist in the coil? So to fix that, really easy. We just click this banking option, turn that off. Now having to go back and forth between this panel and then when you select it, it disappears. What we can do is we can select our null and tear this tab out. So if I click it, I can pull a version of it here like that and just have it in the corner so we can try it out. So now we don't get the banking in the sweep object. So I want the compression to not touch right here. You can see it's almost touching. I want the coil to compress evenly. So these areas at the ends are going to compress less distance. And the way we fix that is in the fall off field. So we'll go to remap and we'll change the contour mode to curve. And I'm going to pull out the curve by saying show separate, drag this out. I'm going to select this point and I'm going to lock the point so I don't move it. And I'm going to lock this point as well. And then what we can do is if you click away, it disappears. Let's pull it back out. So what we can do is we can use this curve to get the coil to compress the way we want. So if I come in here and I set this to like -0.1, you can see it compresses differently. And whatever you put here, you want to do the same. So 0.1. And you can see we now have a more consistent compression distance. So I like that. I'll leave it. And you can adjust those values that you want for your project. So you can see the distance is traveling less here than it is here. So we're done with the fall off field. So I like turning it off in the viewport. We can check it out. And that feels great. So next what we'll do is we want to get some noise in here and get some logic built in. We also want to bring in the bool object to trim the tops and the bottoms. So let's do the trimming first. So to do that, we're going to add a block here. I'll set this to 50 and 50 on the X and Z. And then the height we'll do 10. And because we set it to 10, if we do -5, which is half the height, it puts it perfectly at the base. And this is going to be our cutter. So I'm going to call this cutter. So I'll select the sweep object, go to bool, hold down Alt, let go, and then we'll add the cutter below. So there's the bottom. And we go to our Boolean here, go to the object tab, and we say subtract. And so there's the bottom trim. And because it's perfectly positioned, we can try this out. You can see the playback is compromised, which is fine. So we'll put in a controller that disables it. And then what we'll do is in the slider, we're going to add another bool. So Alt click, and this is going to be for the top. So I'm going to take the cutter, and I'm going to drag it above. So it's outside of our slider, move it to 120, and then get the distance here. So we're going to do 120 plus the height that we did in the negative value. So we'll set it to 125. And you can see it's perfectly in the middle trimming. So we'll add it to the bottom below the slider. And there's the trimmed top. We'll set the Boolean to subtract, and there's the top cut. So you want your values perfect. And you can see we don't get any movement or any slippage happening in the trim. So let's add the logic that disables and enables. So this one's really easy. We go to our user data, manage user data, or add user data, and we'll say trimmed. Hit enter. And we're going to say Boolean. Default value we'll leave unchecked. Doesn't doesn't really matter actually. And there's our trimmed controller. We'll go to our Xpresso. We'll add this in to our output field. We'll add our first Boolean, and I'll put this one up here out of the way, and we'll do this Boolean up here. So our first Boolean, we're going to go here to properties, click enabled, properties enabled, and we'll drag these connectors in to trimmed, change the order. So now we can try it out. And this isn't getting us what we want completely because you can see they're disabled and we get the boxes. So we're going to do the cutters as well. So go to the Xpresso, we'll add the cutter, properties enabled, plug it in, and this one as well. So there you go. Let's try it out. So it's enabling and disabling. You can see the bottoms are trimming. Go to configure, safe frames will turn off. So there you go. So I can compress this and you can see the playback will be significantly faster. So let's go ahead and add the noise next that will self-animate. So this is where logic comes in. So let's clean up our project here. So what we need to do is we need to have a logic controller that allows us to do like we did with the Boolean switch, where we can say it's animated or it's not animated. So to do that, we just right click in here, go to Xpresso and go to logic and do condition. And this allows us to do a switch. So let's go ahead and add a manage user, select the controller, click add, and we'll just type in animated, hit enter, and we'll select Boolean. We'll leave it unchecked. And there's our clicker for animated. So we'll click and drag this into our logic output, click the switch like so. And then what we'll do is we'll take these outputs and drag them in here, add our compression into the first input. So right now our first input is doing compression and the switch is flipping it and it's spitting us out the percentage value. So this is correct. So next what we need to do is in this second input, when we click this, nothing will happen because it's empty. So what we'll do is we need to go over here, right click, Xpresso, general, and add a noise. And noise will spit us a 0 to 1, which will remap from 100% 0 to 100%. So this will work directly. So what we'll do is we'll right click. We want to be accurate and do a range mapper and do 0 to 1, but our output is going to be a percentage. So we'll add our noise in and plug it in. So let's try it out. So we'll click animated and you'll notice it jumps downward. And the reason it did that is because we're getting positive and negative values. So what we need to do is in our noise, we'll click positive only, and there you go. So I'm going to extend my timeline out to 1,000 frames so we get something a little bit longer. And you can see it's overriding the compression value. We can do trimmed, that works. And you can see how slow it is. And then if we click animated, it unchecks and goes back to its default, and then compression works. So let's make available the properties. So I'll uncheck this, stop the playhead. And we want a slider here that allows us to basically bring down this value of noise so we can animate it from like stopped. So it's the noise is playing, but we're not affecting it as much. So to do that, we're going to go to manage user data, select this, and we'll click on float slider. And we want to leave this percentage. And this is under the animated section. So we'll call this compression amount. And so what we'll do is we're going to add to this controller a group, and we'll call this animated, and we'll add our animated checkbox in our compression amount, and then hit OK. And now you can see we have a tab for animated. And then this slider is going to be the how much affected of the animation is available. So when I do this, I like re-dragging in my shock, which is the same as this one here, but it's just duplicating it so we can do our own controls for just the animation. So I'll do compression amount because we're going to have noise and stuff like that in this one. So I'll make it taller. And what we want to do is we need to value change this range mapper. So the output lower, if I go back here, if I set this to animated and hit play and bring this value up, you can see this squishes it. And if I bring this upper value, it brings it back to its original position. So this is the value we want to affect. So I'll stop this. So we want to do the output upper. So I'll bring this in here. So we'll click output upper and we'll drag this value in here. So now we can try it out. So we'll animate it, hit play, and you can see now this is the amount of shake and compression it's going to do. So then we can animate it from here, and then some title comes up or something happens, and then we show it animating. So we just move the slider up. So let's get the noise controls in here. So we'll go to our Xpresso editor, select the noise, and we're going to change the noise to turbulence because we want detail. Octaves is how much detail in the noise is going to be available to us, and frequency is going to be the speed, and seed is the random amount. So we'll come in here and do octaves. We want the input for frequency, and we want the value for seed. So I'm going to click manage user data, select the animated group, go to add user data, and the first one we're going to do is octaves, which I'm going to give it a different name. I'm going to call it detail, and we want float slider, and instead of percentages, we want real numbers, and I'm going to set this to 0.5. So this moves in groups of 0.5 values. So it's half of whole numbers, and we'll say our base value is set to 1 and our maximum is set to 5, and we'll do that for the show min and max values. So now you can see when I move this, it goes in increments of 0.5. So we'll leave this at 2. Let's leave it at 3. 2.5 looks good. And then we're going to add the frequency, which is speed. So I'll click this, call it speed, hit enter, change this to float slider, percent to real. And this one we're going to do 0.1 step, and we'll set the base value to 1 and our max to 5 as well. And then the last one is going to be the seed value. So select the group, call this randomization. We'll change this to integers, and we'll just set this to 999. Make our controller taller here. So we'll add to this shock value here. We'll add detail, speed, and randomization. animation. And we just plug these directly in. So 1-for-1 frequency and randomization. So let's try it out. We'll hit play. So there's our speed. I'll set it to 3, and then we can bring down the slider for compression amount. So it starts out, shot animates, comes into frame, and then we go and start animating the shock. We can undo the animation and manually compress it to show it moving. And the last value I want to bring in is I want to be able to, let's say I pass this off and the client wants to make changes to how much this compresses. We can go to our Xpresso editor and replace this amount and have an input field. So I'll go here to manage user data, select the shock controller. We can close this, say add user data, and I'll put below compression. I'll do max compression. We'll do integer, and we'll just leave this at 100. Our default value we'll set to 50, and we want whole numbers. So now we have a max compression value here. We'll add this in here, and we're going to plug this into wherever this is plugged in. So I'm going to take this, plug this in here, take this one and plug this in here, into here, sorry. And then we don't need this node. So this is what we have so far. You can tidy up the Xpresso rig. I'm just going to leave it like this for now, and then we're going to try it out. So I'll hit play, turn on our animation. We can bring this up to 65. You can see it goes higher. So we can bring it up to 85, and you can see it really compresses. You can undo this and do compression and turn this down to get the max compression, let's say 65, and there you go. Now your shock won't actually animate this far. I'm just being dramatic with it. And then we can try the trim, compress. You can see we get a viewport expense, and there's the shock. So pretty simple setup, but requires a little bit of trickery with the linear field. And you can also, if you want to give the user the ability to change this curve, you can always add this in your node. So to do that, we go to our Xpresso editor and we come in here and we drag this in and we bring in our spline, and then you add to the user data a spline controller and you just link it directly. But I don't think that's really necessary. That would be something that I would make sure people can't change once you pass off the file. So what's great about this rig setup is that it's all encompassed in groups so that we can change the position when we copy and paste this into our existing project. So I can just copy this and paste it into here and it'll work. So we can change the position. You can see it still works. So by grouping it, nesting it, it's all relative positioning. Now there was one thing that I almost forgot to mention. So you can see in my example, we have a slider with a bunch of assets that get moved with the shock spring. So when I compress it, you can see all these elements move along with it. So at the current setup, we just have the Boolean happening. And so we don't have the ability to add more assets. So let me show you a quick fix. So before we copy and paste this into our shock model, we need to adjust some things. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take and bring my shock back to 0. So the Y is set to 0, and I'm going to just Alt G. I'm going to rename this slider, and I want to change the icon. I like using this one here that looks like the spine. Give it a custom color and make it blue. So there's our slider. Open it up, and now all of our other assets that move with the spring will get placed inside. We need this slider to move up and down. As of right now, we have the slider here, which I'm going to rename. I'm going to call this coil, and this is what moves up. We want to encapsulate this and be able to throw other assets inside. So I'm just going to do a, let's say, a disk like that would be placed at the base, throw it inside, and you'll see when we compress it, the disk does not move with it. So we want to be able to throw other assets inside. So what we need to do is we need to go into our Xpresso, and here the coil is moving Y. We want the position of the slider to move up. So we'll go here to Y, add it in and connect like so. And I'll just move this up for now. So let's try it out. And now it's working. So now this is ready for using with other elements. So I can delete this, and now I can copy this shock into the rest of the model. That's it for this tutorial. I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, post in the comment section below. Thank you so much. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on more content. Thanks for your support.